as I was saying, the one thing all these great trial lawyers have in common is connection. And, Rex Parris always talks about how he spent, I spent a month learning how to do this. And it makes sense that learning how to do correct hand gesticulations takes time. I don't know if a month is a bit of an exaggeration, but, it still is, it's a skill that has to be learned. And I was talking to Rex the other day at his house, and he said, once I realized that everything that these great trial lawyers were doing was learnable, that I could sit and study and train myself to do it, I knew I could do it. I knew I could become a great success in this field, because I know myself, I'm willing to do the work. And if you're willing to do the work, there's really nothing you can't have, because most people aren't willing to do the work. But then, of course, comes the next question is, what is the work? What is it that needs to be done in order to train you to get the skills of connection? And so that is what I have been somewhat working on for the last 9 years, because before the pandemic, I taught another program called Trojan Horse Method for about 6 years. And it was a presentation skill type program, but I didn't have full knowledge. So, because I didn't have enough experience with the great trial lawyers to see what they were doing and to try to take stuff from that to make this what I could be teaching more effective, because it's all about the effectiveness, bottom line. But before I get into the substance, my friend Jerome Hawkins, so he made this video, and I was against it at the beginning, but I think it's a really good idea to give everybody a good context of how I got to where I am right here today and why we're doing this program.
My name's Dan Ambrose. I'm the founder of Trial Lawyers University. My father and two of my brothers and my sisters were all lawyers, but I didn't have some type of burning sense of injustice because I never really understood the struggle of society or the people that were disenfranchised. It wasn't until I became a lawyer and started doing public defense work and saw how people were so marginalized in the justice system that it was very frustrating and infuriating to me. I was a criminal defense lawyer back in Detroit for about 18 years. A friend of mine encouraged me to move out to California to become a personal injury lawyer. It's not easy to move to a new city when you're 45 years old. It's a lot different than when you're 25. I didn't have any kind of network. All I had was, a vision of a different life. I really enjoy that community aspect of being a trial lawyer, and I love teaching. I think it's the greatest thing ever is to be able to transform somebody's life, especially a trial lawyer's life. I started doing workshops at my apartment. I would have, younger lawyers come over. We would meet once a week, and we'd present and record ourselves and play it back. And that developed into Trojan Horse Method and taught presentation skills, witness prepping, voir dire, case structure, and we evolved that a long way. We take trials from beginning to end and kind of take a 3-hour journey through the highlights of that trial with actual trial footage, breaking down what they're doing and how they're doing it and articulating it so that a younger, less experienced lawyer can actually utilize that information, can understand what they did that worked, what they did that didn't work, what they would do differently, regardless of the result. So if you have a similar type case, you can review that and say, okay, I have a big head start in putting my case together. You have to have a method, some type of system. It's all about embedding patterns into your mind until you can get up and not only understand it, but actually do them while on your feet in front of a group of strangers. Until you get on your feet, it's all just theory. And you have to have a coach. You have to have somebody who can look at what you're doing objectively, give you slight course corrections, and be able to model for you how to do it correctly also, so that you can replicate that model to, with your own personal take on it. Because once you practice these skills, everybody's practicing the same skills, so you can see the mistakes that they're making and improve upon them. That's why the person that gets to go 4th, 5th, or 6th They get up there and they almost nail it. And this is where we've gotten to. And the people that, come to the training now, they just learn so much faster, which is really exciting. Typically, trial lawyers become great trial lawyers because they have a great mentor and they get to try a lot of cases. And in this day and age, there's not a whole lot of mentoring going around, and people don't get to try as many cases as they used to. But the pandemic came along, and it allowed me to address half the problem, which was the lack of mentors. I started doing interviews with the greatest trial lawyers in the country, and they weren't nearly as busy because they weren't going to court for the next year. And I really given these great trial lawyers an opportunity to be mentors to thousands of people. It has really impacted me and evolved how I think about trial and what the skills that are necessary to be an effective trial lawyer are and how to teach them. In Las Vegas at TLU Live, there's never been a group of trial lawyers assembled like the one we've assembled. And we gave them the room and the space and the time to truly teach. We're gonna have 8 different tracks, 8 different lecture halls. The instructors that are coming like, what do you want me to present on? I'm like, you tell me, what do you need to share with the trial lawyer community that if you die tomorrow and they didn't give that information, the world would be a more unjust place? I mean, the whole goal of Trial Lawyers University is to transform the trial lawyer's life, to help that trial lawyer become a winning trial lawyer. Because when you're a winning trial lawyer, I mean, you're excited about going to work. You're excited about going to trial. You're not afraid of trial. And it's not just that trial lawyer has a better life, but every single client that that person comes in contact with has a better result, and the world becomes a more just place.
Got to update. This is 2022. But anyway, so I've been trying to figure this out for a long time. And I really think I made a tremendous amount of progress. Tremendous amount of progress. To become a winning trial lawyer, I think you need 3 things. The first thing that you need to win would be the evidence, right? I mean, that's what you all do. You litigate. You do depositions, you do interrogatories, you do request to admit, request to produce. You got to get the evidence. And once you've got this big mountain of evidence, what do you do with it all? Let's say you have 100 pieces of evidence. Well, you can't give the 100 pieces of evidence to the jury. So the next skill that you have to master, the next thing you need to learn, is trial strategy. And how do you learn trial strategy? How do we all learn trial strategy? From doing trials. We learn a lot when you do a trial, right? But you learn it from reading books. You learn it from going to conferences like this. You learn it from, watching Trial Lawyers University, watching case analysis, see how people put their case together. Because you got this big pile of evidence, and you got to figure out which 20 pieces do I need to give to the jury, and then how do I sequence those 20 pieces to the. What's up, Teddy? What's up, man? I'm all right. This is like the biggest Houston contingency ever. I think there's like 6 people from Houston here. Anyways. You got to decide what order am I going to put those 20 pieces. And then for each piece, how do I sequence the information? Like each witness, what sequence do I ask those questions? What visuals am I going to use with that piece of evidence in order to communicate to the jury? And these 2 things, I do not profess to be an expert in, especially evidence. I've never, litigated anything. That is not my strong suit. Trial strategy, I know a fair amount from that, just from doing, I've done a fair amount of trials myself, but really studying all these great trial lawyers. I've learned a lot of trial strategy over the last 2 years. But the one element that nobody I've really seen ever teach or any of these conferences is this one, is the trial presentation skills. Because everything you do in the courtroom, you can be doing more effectively, whether it's the opening statement, whether it's the voir dire, whether it's cross-examination. And in any skill set, I don't care if it's chess, I don't care if it's basketball or trial lawyering. there's a certain number of component skills that make up the vast majority of what you're going to do. Let's say there's 15 skills, 10 skills you have to master. If you master those 10 skills, then you've got 95% of the game. And the rest of them just kind of come to you because you have proficiency and confidence in the skills that you mastered. Does that make a little bit of sense, I hope, to people? And so what are these skills? Let me see if it's my... So what are these core skills? One would be eye contact. People talk about eye contact, but there's different kinds of eye contact. There's an eye contact which is, what I call micro glances. So when you first get up, and you're sort of ramping up your connection as you get to know people, like you do in regular life. Because if you meet somebody in regular life and they're all like locked into you and over attentive to you, you're like, back off, man. That's kind of weird, right? But relationships with people are just like relationships with a tree. They grow over time. And the amount of contact you have should gently increase. But you should do it, think about it methodically and strategically. So when I talk about a micro contact, what I'm talking about is like this. When you first stand up in front of a jury, it's, good morning, everybody. And you try to look as many people in the eye as you can, just briefly. Good morning, everybody. And then, as we've all just heard, my name's Dan Ambrose. So that's why I talk micro connections, as opposed to what most people do, which I call scanning. They're like this. Good morning, everybody. And then I didn't look at anybody. I looked at maybe one person here, one person there, but I kind of just scanned and skipped over the rest of you. There was no effort for me to connect with you at all. So when I'm talking about these micro connections is the effort to make a connection with individuals, and then you slowly ramp up that connection. Another skill with eye contact comes because when you connect with somebody, you have to connect with them, and then you start talking to them. And then when you're done talking to them, pause for a moment, disconnect, move to another person, and don't start talking until you've connected in their eyes. And and then when you do, your hand will drop, you reconnect, your arm extends to a person, and now you've reconnected with just that one person. So it's about taking the time to connect and disconnect. Does this make some sense to folks? And if during this process anything doesn't make sense to you, just raise your hand, Mark Harding, and say, hey, that doesn't make sense to me because I was typing here instead of, so Mark, I'm going to suggest that you don't take notes because this is going to be recorded. And, I'm going to give everybody, whether you have TLU on demand or you don't, I'll give you access for a month after this conference to everything that's recorded. So that way you don't have to think about missing anything. And the stuff that's in the main room is going to be live streamed. And there's this guy named Ray Asher. And he takes the best notes you've ever seen. He takes notes on every conference. So he's going to take notes like crazy, and then he's going to send them in every morning and every afternoon. So you don't have to bother taking notes. At the end of the day, you will have the most concise notes you've ever seen. And you'll be like, wow, I didn't have to waste any energy. I could stay focused on the presentation. So eye contact is important, but learning how to make it, connect and disconnect is a skill. And so that we have, pause before leaving them, and then glance control. That's what we're talking about. Oh, 1 second here, I forgot to grab something out of here. Oh. Sorry about that. So what I mean by glance control is the jury will look where you look. For example, if I was to say, Anthony Dubé and his mom, Linda, they walk in the Tropicana and up to the front counter. So if I look there, everybody's going to follow where I look. Whereas if I say, Anthony Dubé and his mom, Linda, walked in the Tropicana up to the front counter, or Brian Reed, then nobody's looking at my picture because they're still looking in my eyes. But if I look, they'll look. Or if I say about 10 minutes later, Deputy Dennis pulls up, gets out of his car, comes into the salon, walks up to Anthony, and he asks him, what happened? So again, that's glance control. When I look out, everybody looks out here at where I'm looking. So, and you'll see that these are just some small demonstrations, but you'll see these skills throughout. Some of you demonstrations of voir dire, opening a cross. And so you see all these skills within the context of the presentations. The next is hand gestures. So for example, I say, good morning, everybody. This is open-handed hand gesture, right? Or, as we've all just heard, my name is Dan Ambrose. So this is a hand gesture, like, come with me, everybody. And my name is Dan Ambrose. And I don't know how many of us have ever had the experience. So when I say hand gestures, I mean that when you're talking to somebody, your hand's extended to them. Because one thing that people don't recognize is that when somebody's a distance from you, that when you extend your arm towards them, there's no doubt in their mind who you're talking to, right? When people stand here and they talk like this, they're talking to somebody that's way away and their hand's not extended to them. The person, like if I'm talking to Jesus and I'm when my arm's extended to Jesus, he knows I'm talking to him, right? But without it, I could be talking, what is your name?
Bob Walters.
Bob Walters. Like when I'm looking right at Bob's like, are you talking to me? You see what I'm saying? But when your arm's extended to somebody, and then as you get more relaxed, then when your arm and your hand starts to move in cadence with your voice, that's even more effective because it acts like as a little sort of beacon in front of your face to draw the attention of the person you're talking to and from the peripherals, other people's attention towards your face. Does this make sense to everybody? And the closer you are to somebody, well, your arm doesn't really extend because you're connected in the face and you can read each other. As you back up as you get more distance, then your arm comes up a little bit. Now it's still in the peripheral. But when a person's a good distance away, like you have in a jury, then's when it's important that your arm's extended to them. And when you're done talking to them, you disconnect. Once you reconnect, you start talking, your arm will extend to them. Does that all make sense? Those are different types. And it takes time and practice to get your hand gesticulations correct. Another key thing is emotional control. So, and that is, for example, but if I do happen to make a mistake and call you by the wrong name, so that part, if I do happen to make a mistake, I'm so embarrassed. That's my mea culpa face. If I do happen to make a mistake and call you by the wrong name, will everybody here feel comfortable saying, hey, Dan, my name's X and not Y? Would you all be willing to do me this favor? So having a warm face when you do this. Because when you ask somebody to do you a favor, you usually have a warm face. Hey, Michelle, can you help me out and grab something for me? You're not like, hey, Michelle, can you help me out? I need you to grab something for me. All right, can you help me out? Can you do me a favor? Because that's sort of like if you were a hitman, right? Like, who am I killing, right? But when people ask favors, their face is warm. And so we should be congruous with that when we're asking the jury for something. Would you all be willing to do me this favor? Does that make sense to everyone so far here? So controlling your emotional state all the time up here and recognizing that your emotions are contagious. And so what you put out, you will get back. And so it's just about, and so you'll see throughout the control of the facial expressions. And when people all the time, they're like, oh, this is like acting. I'm like, brilliant. It is a lot like acting. But it's more like being a stand-up comedian. Because stand-up actors don't give a shit about their audience, right? The audience is separate. But stand-up comedians, you ever see them, they're like creating space up here, they'll come in, connect with you, bring you into their story, and whatever they're doing. But they have to constantly, they have a script. There's no stand-up comedian that doesn't worry about all their materials. But then, before they get to the big stage in Vegas, what do they all do? Go to small clubs and practice their shit, right? And refine it, and get the rhythms, get the patterns. So when they get to the big time, it's all just replay. Because the patterns, because one thing that I have come to learn is that all of learning is pattern recognition. And so when you can start to see the patterns within things, it all starts to make sense. Like somebody speaks a foreign language to you that you don't speak, you're gonna be like, it's gibberish. But, if you do speak it, it totally makes sense. And the patterns of trial, once you start to study them and get more experience, they become more logical, just like the patterns of voir dire. So it's pattern recognition. Sure. Word choice. Word choice is very important. And the words you use matter. So for example, I say, as we've all just heard, My name is Dan Ambrose. That's different than as you've all just heard. Okay? And the next line is, and I don't know how many of us. That's different than I don't know how many of you, because that's you over here, us here. So that's just a small example of word choice. But, because like I teach these materials in scripts. And in the scripts, pretty much every word matters. And people are like, oh, what's up, Bo? Bo knows. Bo's got his first trial coming up in about 3 weeks. So Bo better be ready. Not embarrassed Trial Lawyers University, or you'd be banned, Bo. Ban Bo. It'd be a new hashtag, ban Bo. Bo, anyways, so word choice is important. And then the next thing to think about too and to train is the pacing of your speech. And to speak at a pace that is, reasonable. Because when people speak too quickly, it overloads the listener's brain. And the pauses, word pacing is also, connected with pausing, which goes right next to it, right? Pausing. And by pausing, for example, I say, because can you imagine if you knew one of the witnesses? You can see three pauses, as opposed if I was to say, because can you imagine if you knew one of the witnesses? That's a lot harder of a chunk of information for your mind to process, especially if people follow sentence after sentence like that. Soon your audience checks out because they are exhausted, because you are overloading their brain. Because as a trial lawyer, one of our goals should be constantly every day thinking, how do we lower the cognitive load of the jury? How do we make this story easier? How do we make it so it's obvious? But to do that, we need to constantly be working on lowering our own cognitive loads, because we can't lower other people's loads when we're all stressed and and how do we do that? By preparing, by practicing, by knowing your materials. And, when I say practicing, the more you can stand up in front of a group, the more you're going to get presence. It's just how the game works. And there's no shortcut to presence. There's no shortcut. Some people might have a head start. For example, if you played a high school or college sports, or you were, in some type of events where you're always in front of people, you're going to develop presence quicker and that confidence quicker. But that's it. Still, the only way to get it is to constantly get up as often as you can in front of people and present. Whether it's a trial, whether it's speaking to a law school, it doesn't matter. You just have to constantly get up and present. Another thing to think about is chunking versus group versus individual. So this is a group move. So good morning, everybody. That's a group move. As we've all just heard, my name is Dan Ambrose. This is individual. I'm just looking at you. And I said, and I was looking at Emmanuel, right? As we've all just heard, my name is Dan Ambrose. So that's individual versus chunking. And again, you'll see knowing when to do which and getting comfortable with it is, again, a skill to be developed. And of course, the one that most people have a lot of trouble with, listening. Listening is a skill. And when jurors is talking, the skill of looking at that person like they are the last person on earth and everything they say is the word of God and making them feel that way is a skill. Or when you can kind of paraphrase what somebody just told you, again, it says, I'm listening to you. What you're saying is important. It's the skill of listening. And then finally, creating space or creating an illusion. Like as trial lawyers, the better illusionists we are, the more successful we're going to be. And what I mean by that is somebody given $20 million, or the case that Will did with his partners a few months back, and they got $38 million for the death of an 11-year-old child. Where the hell in God's green earth is anybody selling their kid for $38 million? Or we have a price tag of $38 million on an 11-year-old child? Nowhere, right? That's why it's an illusion of value, an illusion of justice. So when we can spin illusions, when we can create illusions in front of people, that's powerful, because we can also cause the jury to experience our stories. So an example of creating space would be the one I just did a moment ago. About 10 minutes later, Deputy Dennis pulls up, gets out of his car, comes into the salon, and walks up to Anthony. And so that's an illusion of a car pulling up, getting out, and a person, a cop walking up. That's creating space. Does that somewhat make sense to y'all? I hope. All right, what did I do with my water? 1 second here. Pardon me, wait. Found another one. So, what I'm going to do now is, let's see. Next slide. So, what I'm going to do now is demonstrate some of these voir dires. And then, George, you want to sit so you can record this? So, no, not Giorgio, not George. This one over here.
George, okay.
Giorgio. So you record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to. This is my plan. How it's going to work? I'm not 100% sure. Because that's, I'm going to demonstrate the first voir dire. Then I'm going to play it back on the screen and break down everything I'm doing. And then somebody else like Raj, who just recently did this program, he'll do the same piece. And so that way, hopefully it'll be a good learning session. But we'll see. It'll be interesting, okay? You ready? All right, so good morning, everybody. Actually, I'm sorry, good afternoon, everybody, my bad. But as we've all just heard, my name is Dan Ambrose. And I don't know how many of us have ever had the experience of meeting a whole bunch of new people, all at the same time. Sort of like maybe we're at a party or something. But if you happen to be anything like me and you weren't blessed with a photographic memory, then you may, on occasion, forget somebody's name. Have we all done this? Okay. Well, I'm going to do my very best to remember all of yours. And I even have this sheet of paper right here to help me. But if I do happen to make a mistake and call you by the wrong name, will everybody here feel comfortable saying, hey, Dan, my name is X and not Y? Would you all be willing to do me this favor? Okay, thanks. Now we need to ask you all some questions about your opinions, your beliefs, and your experiences so that we can help all of you decide if this case will be the right case for you. Will this be okay with everybody? Okay. Because the reality is not every case is right for every juror. And that's why we all go through this process called jury selection. And that's also why the judge, he read us all the list of potential witnesses, introduced all of us to the parties and to the lawyers. Because can you imagine if you knew one of the witnesses? Or perhaps maybe you were friends with one of the parties or even one of the lawyers. Can we all see how this could cause potential bias? Does everybody know what we mean when we say bias? Justin, how would you define bias?
Leaning one way or the other for evident reason to do so.
Okay. Thanks, Justin. And is it Jessica? We just heard Justin say kind of having a leaning. You tend to agree with him?
I would.
And what might you like to add to our definition?
A bias? I think
He
he nailed it.
nailed it? Okay. All right. How about you, Greta? Anything you want to add? Okay, well, let me ask, does anybody? How about you, Marcus?
Maybe a sense of unfairness or something like that.
Okay, perhaps it can be a little unfair. And I even heard, a juror one time describe it as like, sometimes it's unconscious. We're not even aware of our biases. So I thought that was yes, George.